Arch turned in his chair and looked out the window of his office. Autumn was in full swing, and he couldn't help but marvel at the dazzling array of colors that met his gaze. Sighing, he returned to his desk and opened the newspaper. It's still early, he thought, sipping his coffee. I'll just relax with the paper and finish my coffee. He read the front page, finding nothing of interest. The next section was Society. Arch smiled and was about to toss the paper aside when he suddenly saw a picture below the fold. It showed Denise standing with a tall, stout man. The caption read, "A British aristocrat and a local woman announced their engagement." Arch sat, stunned, in shock. The newspaper fell out of his hands. A terrible sense of loss gripped his heart again, and he dropped his head into his hands, letting the tears flow. The next chapter. He looked at the newspaper lying on the floor and wondered if he had really seen what he had dreamed. No, the image on the newspaper hadn't changed. The picture was of his ex-wife and a tall man smiling at the camera. Apparently, the picture had been taken at a party where they had probably announced their engagement, which was what the caption said. Arch hadn't seen Dee in over 3 years, but she still looked good. Despite the depression and stress of the divorce, the years had been kind to her. She seemed to be trying to get her life together somehow after the divorce, unlike him, who had gone head over heels in work and avoided socializing with people for longer than he cared to remember. Leaning back in his chair, Arch ran a hand through his hair, which now had more gray in it than it had 3 years ago, and sighed. This was a shock to his system. While he didn't believe he could get back together with Dee after all they'd been through, he'd assumed that she, like him, held out hope for reconciliation, however faint. Obviously, he was wrong. Dee seemed withdrawn, and he still continued to procrastinate and feel sorry for himself. Not wanting to wallow in the abyss, Arch decided it was time for a change, a long overdue change in his life. He picked up the newspaper and tossed it into the basket by his desk. He finished the last sip of his coffee and prepared to start his day. The first thing he needed to do was talk to his assistant and secretary. It was time to start delegating more and trusting his team to do what he was paying them to do. It was also time to get his head out of his ass and get back into a routine. It took Arch a while to redistribute the workload among his employees and make sure they were working to the best of their abilities, and to start reducing his time in the office. He was proud of his employees and how they handled the new tasks he assigned them, but he expected nothing less. They were smart people, well-trained, and, truth be told, underutilized because he failed to use them for the purpose for which they were hired. It wouldn't happen again, Arch vowed. From now on, his men would be intimately involved in the day-to-day affairs of the office, and he would lead and direct them as he should have from the beginning. A few weeks after his rebirth, Arch was sitting in the cafeteria of the medical center where he worked and noticed his old friend Bernie Green walk in. Bernie had been married to Deborah's sister for 2 years. God, had it really been that long? Arch waved Bernie over and invited him to join him at the table. "Bernie, how are you doing?" "How's Deborah?" "Fine, Arch. Deborah's fine, thanks. And how are you?" "I'm doing fine, Bernie. I feel better now that I've finally gotten my head in order. I'm sure you know what I mean." "Unfortunately, I do. I've been worried about you. You've worked too long and too hard. You don't want another heart attack, do you?" "No, Bernie. One is enough, thank you. I've been following the doctor's orders for the most part, except for the long hours, of course, but that's changed now, too. So I'm sure he'll be thrilled at the next checkup." "I'm glad to hear that, Arch. Deborah and I have been worried about you." "Really?" Arch said with a wry smile. "I was under the impression that I wasn't high on Deborah's list of people to worry about, especially after the divorce." Bernie had the nobility to adopt an embarrassed look. "You know, Arch, Deborah and Dee are very close. She's matured over the years and realized that Dee is more to blame than you are." "That's very nice of her, since Dee was the one with another guy between her legs," Arch said tautly. "I'm sorry, Bernie, but even after all this time, her cheating on me after all I've been through to support her really pisses me off." "I can understand that, Arch, but I wish you'd talk to someone about it. Holding a grudge for a long time is not healthy." "Is that what you think I'm doing?" "I don't hold a grudge against Bernie. I rarely think about Dee now. It's only at times like this, when the conversation turns to her, that old memories come up. I loved her, Bernie. I loved her with all my heart. I thought we'd grow old together. When it turned out that her physical problems prevented us from having children, I was as devastated as she was, but you'd never know it from her or Deborah. I was a dutiful, loving husband to her for 12 years while she was in therapy, and then as she grew more and more distant from me each day, did I tell you she cursed me for trying to throw a party for her 40th birthday? Bernie's eyes widened at this remark. No, I didn't know that. Oh, yes, I was stunned, to say the least, but I apologized and never brought it up again, but the coldness in our marriage only intensified. We were two people living in the same house, but there wasn't really any marriage. We could have been brother and sister despite all the closeness we had shared over the past 2 years. I tried everything I could to get her back, Bernie. I really did. But what can a person do when the other doesn't even try? I doubted the viability of the marriage even before the affair, so the fact that I caught her with another man was just the latest in a long line of events that should have told me the marriage was over. My only regret is that it took a heart attack for me to wake up from the stupor I'd been in for years. Arch fell silent. Talking about it had taken more energy than he'd intended, and he slumped his shoulders and stared down at his plate. There was no more hunger. Bernie put a hand on his friend's shoulder and squeezed. I'm sorry, Arch. I didn't know. Nobody knows until Dee tells you himself. I didn't want to talk about it, and I don't want to now, but I thought you deserved to hear the other side of the story since I'm sure you've heard Dee's side of the story. I admit I have heard it, but being in my position, I knew there had to be more to it than I had heard. After all, there are two sides to any argument. I hope you don't get upset, but I have to ask, do you still love her? Arch paused and took a deep breath, letting the air out through his teeth before answering. I've been asking myself the same question. Do I still love her? To be honest, I have to say that, yes, I still love her. We had a few good years together, but it wasn't enough, and the bad years outweighed the good ones. The thing is, while I still love her, I'm not in love with her, you know? I love her as a friend who has been away for a long time. I think back to the good times we had and sometimes wonder what happened. But she's been gone so long that any feelings of being in love with her are long gone. Besides, it doesn't matter, because she's engaged now, isn't she? I remember seeing an ad in the paper a while back. Bernie smiled, wondering if Arch's information would make him reconsider his stance on Dee. Well, Arch, I have news on that score. Dee has had a change of heart. She was fascinated by the guy, but when it came down to business and she realized she was going to live in England, she refused. Deborah questioned her sanity. The guy was rich, after all, and seemed to have a thing for Dee. He'd been shocked when she broke off the engagement, but had accepted it. Now he's back in England. Well, that makes all the difference, doesn't it? Arch thought. Why? Just because she's not engaged, and that was the trigger that threw me off balance, doesn't change the fact that I'm tired of dealing with Dee and her depression and all that other crap all these years. She may regret the affair and may even be normal now, but how long will that last? Last time she was in therapy and on medication, and she seemed normal then too. And look what happened. Nah, sorry, been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Arch realized he'd been silent for too long and, catching his friend's gaze, replied, I'm sorry to hear that from Bernie. Dee deserves to be happy, and I was glad to hear she's moving on with her life. I hope she doesn't give up. She's a good woman, if she's really healthy, and she deserves happiness just like everyone else. I was hoping you'd want to reconnect with her when you found out she wasn't going to marry. No, I'm sorry, Bernie, but sometimes love just isn't enough. I've used up all my love for her over the last 12 years of our marriage. Besides, despite what she may say or even believe, she couldn't love me in those last few years either. If she had loved me, she would have asked for a divorce before she even decided to have an affair. Bernie was shocked by Arch's statement. How can you say that, Arch? Dee has always loved you. Come on, Bernie, you're a psychiatrist. Maybe I'm being stubborn, but I don't see any love for your husband in taking another man into your bed, especially into your bed in a house you share together. The least she could do is take the guy to a hotel. No, she didn't even bother to show that kind of concern for me. She didn't care that she brought a man into our home. She didn't care that she brought a man into our bed. She didn't care that there was even the slightest possibility that I might come home and find her in the arms of another man. No, that's not love. It's a total disregard for the feelings of the man you're married to. It's indifference to his feelings. It's a perverse pleasure in the chance of being caught, however small that chance may be, and throwing adultery in your husband's face. It shows that she weighed the chances of being caught and the consequences and considered them so insignificant or unimportant that she didn't care if she got caught. I think it shows such disrespect for me that there is no love in that. I'm sorry, Bernie, but it's over between me and Dee. Bernie leaned back in his chair, stunned. It was obvious that Arch had thought about this for a long time and had come to some interesting and probably correct conclusions. He'd counseled enough couples with marriage problems to understand how a man could come to the conclusion that there was no love in him if his wife behaved in this manner. Considering Arch had supported his wife through all her problems and illnesses for years, it was no wonder he felt this way. He looked at his friend sympathetically. I understand what you're saying, Arch, and I can see that you've given it a lot of thought. In principle, I agree with you. The actions you describe are certainly not an expression of love for your spouse. I think there are some extenuating circumstances in Dee's case, but it's up to you to decide whether they can outweigh the pain you've obviously experienced because of her betrayal. That's the thing, Bernie. Even though things weren't great in our marriage, haven't been for years, I never thought she would have an affair. I didn't think she was even interested in sex, for heaven's sake. But even with all the animosity between us, I never thought she would hurt me this much. Seeing her in the arms of another man killed all my love for her and certainly any chance of forgetting what had happened. Throughout all these years, I had never been tempted to seek solace outside of our marriage. I loved Dee too much and took my vows seriously, in sickness and in health. Dee needed me, and I was there for her. Even when she seemed normal, I was there for her, hoping that the sweet, loving, fun-loving woman I married would come back to me. But it never happened. Even in my darkest hours, I never thought about cheating on her, and yet I still had options. I couldn't do it. It was wrong, damn it. It was wrong. Arch's voice broke off and he collapsed into his chair. His emotions were running dry and he was exhausted. I'm so sorry, Arch. I'm glad you told me about all this. It sheds light on some questions I've had for a long time. You know that Dee dated me after the divorce, and I certainly can't discuss what we talked about, but if it helps, Dee doesn't know why she did it. Although I have a few theories. Dee loved you and still does, but she realizes she hurt you. But I don't think even she knows how deep. I won't bring up Dee again, Arch. But I had to try. Deborah asked me to. She wanted you to know how Dee felt and continues to feel. Your decision not to talk to her or open her messages to you made Deborah think you were being stubborn. At those words, Arch's head popped up, and Bernie raised his hands in a wow gesture. I know you're not, Arch. I know you. And you're not a stubborn man. And after what you've told me, I'm more convinced of that than ever. I really wish things had worked out differently for you and Dee, but I understand your position. You won't hear anything more from me on that subject. Thanks for listening, Bernie. This is the first time I've talked about it with anyone at such length. Now that I've talked openly about it all, it makes me feel a lot better. Bernie smiled at his friend and said, No problem. What are friends for? By the way, my bill is coming in the mail. Arch chuckled. You know, considering how good I'm feeling right now, I think I'll pay it. He looked down at his plate, picked up his fork, and started on his lunch, finding that he was hungry after all. The conversation with Bernie had not only reassured Arch, it made him think about his decision not to talk or make contact with Dee. He avoided her in an attempt to protect himself. He knew that if he confronted her, he would say something that he would regret later, and he didn't want that. He also didn't want her making excuses for her behavior. What did it matter what the underlying reasons were for cheating? What matters is that she made a conscious decision to bring a man into her home and into our bed. As much as he liked Bernie as a person, listening to the usual excuses of a psychopath would be unpleasant for him. To listen to her explanations, or worse, judging from Bernie's words, there was not a single reason she could give. It would open up all the old wounds and make him relive the incident again, which he would never want to do. So, to save his heart, he cut off all contact with Dee except through their lawyers. That, of course, was 3 years ago. Maybe it was time to finally talk to Dee? Perhaps it was, but he would have to think about it for a while longer. A couple of weeks later, Arch sat in an inconspicuous booth at his favorite new restaurant waiting for his ex-wife. For the 1,000th time since he'd left her a message on her answering machine at work, asking her to meet him tonight, he questioned the reasonableness of the dinner invitation. Did he really want to meet her face-to-face in such a setting? Wouldn't he thereby send the wrong signal? And would she come at all? Just as he was pondering the what-if scenarios, the hostess invited Dee to the table. As befitted a gentleman, he stood up to greet her. Dee, thank you for coming. I hope you had no trouble choosing a seat, he said, pulling out a chair for her. Settling into the chair, Dee blushed, remembering how much she had enjoyed Arch's company and how much she had missed him over the years. You're welcome, Arch. Thanks for inviting me. It's a very nice place, is it new? Yes, it opened a year or so ago. I like it a lot. They have great food, and the tables aren't so close together that you can't have privacy and talk without hearing a word from the other diners. Dee wondered if Arch wanted to say something to her in private. It didn't matter at the moment. Dee had her own plans for this meeting and decided to get straight to the point. Arch, I'm so sorry. Dee, please. That's not why I asked you here. I've had a lot of time to think things over, and I know you're sorry. The woman I married would have stayed the same, and while there have been many changes in our lives, I don't think you've changed that much. Thanks for your confidence, Arch. You're right. We've both changed a lot, both before and after the divorce. I want you to know that I take full responsibility for everything that has happened. I really appreciate that, Dee. I want you to know that I don't need to explain the incident that led to our divorce. I've come to terms with it, and I don't want to open old wounds. I want to talk about why I invited you here today. I still feel I owe you an explanation, Arch. Please, Dee. He said it a little more sharply than he intended. Taking a calming breath, Arch continued. I don't need an explanation. This is all water under the bridge, and we both need to put it behind us. We can't keep living in the past, which is why I invited you here today. I want us to be friends again. Dee's heart raced at Arch's last words. Friends? What do you mean? Friends, Dee. Nothing more than that. We've had many years together, and while not all of them have been good, some of them have been good. And there's no reason why two grown people with a history like ours can't be friends. It may have been wrong of me to cut you off, but I can't fix that. All I can do is make things right now and in the future. Can we be friends again, Dee? Arch sat back and waited for her answer. Dee lowered her gaze to her plate and then looked at Arch again through her lashes. Tears stood in her eyes, and her throat constricted. She never thought Arch would ever say those words to her. She was sure she had lost all chance of communicating with him because of her actions, and now she couldn't expect to be friends with him. She swallowed twice to clear her throat before she spoke. I'd really like that, Arch. I really wish we could be friends. I hoped for it, but I never thought it would come true. I'm so glad you decided to make me this offer. I'm stunned, but I'm honored. I guess I'm an even bigger ogre than I thought, if that's what you think. I never stopped loving you, Dee. I'm just not in love with you. I hope we can start a new relationship as good friends. I appreciate your feelings, Arch. And even though my actions don't agree with my feelings, I've never stopped loving you either. I want to start a new relationship with you too, as very good friends. She saw that Arch had already poured the wine before she arrived and raised her glass to make a toast. To good friends. Arch raised his glass and smiled as well. To good friends. They clinked their glasses, took a sip of wine each, picked up their menus, and started talking. Even though they hadn't spoken to each other in 3 years, the conversation soon turned to pleasant chatter, as it had before all the trouble in their marriage. All too soon, dinner and dessert were finished, and it was time to head home. Arch pushed Dee's chair back and took her hand. I had a very good time, Dee. I have to admit I was very nervous. I thought tonight was going to be awkward, and for a while it was, but once we got settled in, it was almost like old times. Can I walk you to your car? Dee smiled and squeezed Arch's hand, then released it. Thank you, sir. I was worried about how the evening would go too, but I had to give it a try, and I'm very glad I did. Thank you for the offer of friendship, Arch. I will always treasure the offer as well as your friendship. Arch walked Dee to her car and waited for her to start the engine before he turned and walked to his car, considering the evening had gone well. Next chapter. Arch sat in his chair at the board meeting and stared into space. Mr. Joseph's CFO, Joe Brambley, was retiring and was talking about his years at the medical center. Arch really liked Joe, but he was always a bit of a talker, and today even more so. He talked endlessly about his career and all the wonderful people he had worked with. He had just reached the 1960s and Arch was bored to tears. Humbled, he tried his best to be considerate, and thanks to CEO Joe, sped up his walk down memory lane, completing it in record time. Everyone thanked Joe for all he had done for them, and he sat back in his seat to a standing ovation from his coworkers. The remaining item on the agenda was the introduction of Joe's replacement. Although Arch had participated in the initial interviews and the second and third interviews with the candidates, he was unaware of the final choice. The general manager, Bill Corrigan, wanted to keep that part of the process confidential after reviewing the staff recommendations. All three candidates had outstanding qualifications. One of them even held a CFO position at a small regional medical center in the state. From the way he evaluated these people, he had no qualms about any of them, so he had no concerns about Bill's choice. However, if asked for his personal opinion, he would have voted for the only woman in that group, Elizabeth Cann. Elizabeth's qualifications were as good as any of the other applicants, and she conducted the interview beautifully, exuding confidence in herself and her abilities. She had some really novel ideas for cost containment, which is always a point of contention in healthcare. But what really made Arch hopeful about her becoming the new CFO was her intelligence. She had a quick wit, which was evident after the last formal interview as they chatted before their next meeting. It had been a long time since Arch had had so much fun with a woman. Of course, it didn't hurt that Elizabeth was attractive in her own way. She looked about his age, between 45 and 50, he guessed, with dark black hair. Judging by a few gray hairs, the hair color was natural, which was rare for a woman of her years. She was quite tall, an inch or two shorter than him in heels, with a medium but graceful figure. But what caught his attention was her smile. She smiled easily and often, but never seemed flippant. At least it seemed to Arch that she would be an excellent choice for their current team. Arch's musings were interrupted by Bill making the announcement everyone had been waiting for. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you all for helping me make the decision to replace Joe. I would also like to thank Joe again for his kind offer to stay on for another month and be available for consultation for 3 months to help his successor settle into his new role. Joe was gratefully applauded, after which Bill continued. While the selection of Joe's replacement was a difficult decision, it was not due to your efforts. It was purely due to the quality of the candidates. I didn't want to turn any of them down, but the choice had to be made. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to our new CFO, Elizabeth Cann. Elizabeth waited her turn in the connecting office and looked around as she entered. She had really wanted this position, had worked hard to get it, and was now ready to take on a challenge she knew she could handle. She had also wanted to work at Center City Medical Center for a long time. This medical center's reputation as one of the best in the state was well known. The best in the business worked here, and she was the best in her opinion, so she knew she could make a difference. To be honest with herself, she was glad she was working with Arch Meter. Out of all the people who interviewed her, she liked him the best. She also found him to be a very attractive man, quick-witted, and very pleasant to be around. Oh yes, she was going to enjoy this job immensely. Thank you, Bill. I just want to say that I appreciate your choice as the new CFO, and I look forward to working with and learning from Joe. Looking directly at Joe, she continued, Joe, I want to thank you in advance for your time, and I promise I'll dig into your brain so hard that you'll have a headache when we're done. Joe and the rest of the staff chuckled at her statement. She then sat down in the chair Bill pointed out to her and made herself comfortable. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to remind you that Joe's retirement party will be held Friday night at the Hilton Hotel at 8 o'clock. It is, of course, formal in nature, so get out your best outfits and be ready for an evening of dinner and dancing. The meeting is adjourned. Bill's staff began to leave the room, not forgetting to shake hands and congratulate Elizabeth on her new position. Arch kept to the sidelines to be the last to leave. Congratulations, Elizabeth. Welcome to the team. I look forward to working with you. Please feel free to contact me. My door is always open. Thank you, Arch, I will. I'm sure we'll work closely together in the future, and I look forward to it. She smiled and looked Arch in the eye. Me too, Elizabeth. Arch twitched nervously, but immediately continued. If you don't think I'm getting too ahead of myself, is it okay if I walk you to the retirement party? I mean, you're new in town and all. Wow, he doesn't waste any time, does he? Elizabeth thought. If it were anyone else, I'd probably say no, but I have a good feeling about Arch. I wouldn't mind seeing what he's up to. Thank you, Arch. I'd be delighted. I haven't had a chance to orient myself, so your offer is much appreciated. Great. We can finalize plans later this week. If you'll excuse me, I have a meeting. I'll talk to you later. With those words, Arch left the room, leaving Elizabeth and Joe alone. Arch is a great guy. He will be a great help to you in the future. Why don't we head over to my office, your office, and we can get to know the staff. Elizabeth smiled and patted Joe on the arm. Joe, this is still your office and your staff, and I don't want you to think otherwise. I'm really looking forward to working with you over the next few weeks. You have a great reputation in our field, and I want to do my best to learn what you know so I can improve myself. Just do everything you can to make this medical center the best it can be, and do it with integrity, and you will succeed. That's what I've always done, and it served me well, as I'm sure it has you. With those words, they headed for Joe's office and her first meeting with the new staff. Next chapter. The retirement party was a great success. Joe and his wife enjoyed the attention and praise of their co-workers all evening. And when Joe thanked everyone for their wonderful years together, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Having received the investment, Joe and his wife were about to embark next month on a trip around the world that they had been planning to take for years. But on his return, he would be available for counseling if Elizabeth needed it, which Joe didn't think would happen. In the week they'd worked together, she'd taken on the job like no one else he'd ever known, and he planned to step away from the business from Monday and let her take over. The transition would be easy, and he made sure Bill knew it. Bill seemed pleased with the information he had received and noted that his intuition had never failed him yet. Bill noticed that his new CFO and COO were getting along well with each other. He saw them talking and laughing easily throughout the evening. He saw them dancing together, although Elizabeth, like Arch, danced with other members of his team. It was nice to see his staff interacting well with each other in such a social setting. However, he was no fool either. He could see a spark budding between Elizabeth and Arch. Elizabeth was an attractive woman that any man would be proud to know. Arch was a handsome man, that too was obvious, and they made a perfect couple. Truth be told, he was pleased to see Arch as happy as he looked this evening. After the divorce, Arch had become a withdrawn man. He was no longer the Arch he had known after the divorce. He was a withdrawn man, unwilling to socialize with others outside of a business setting. Instead of socializing, Arch was working more and more, although that had changed recently. Bill had even tried to get Arch interested in social activities by making sure that the right ladies were present at corporate events, but no one seemed to be able to interest Arch. Then, 5 or 6 months ago, Arch seemed to come out of his stupor and began to gradually return to his previous lifestyle. A thorough investigation revealed that Arch and his ex-wife had settled their differences and agreed to be friends again. Although he, like Arch's other friends, had hoped that Arch and Dee would reconcile, it didn't happen. Although Bill guessed why that had happened, he had never pushed for it, and so he was glad that the two had settled on friendship rather than the stalemate they had been living in for the past 3 years. While he wasn't sure that Elizabeth would be a good fit for Arch, he wouldn't know that for a long time, as he would need to get to know her much better to make that decision. He was glad to see that Arch was showing interest in her. He would have to keep an eye on the developing romance to make sure that if something went wrong, it wouldn't affect his team. He would hate to lose one or both of them because they could no longer work together. However, it was too early to worry about that now, because escorting a woman to a party and a few dances was not an affair. Next chapter. Elizabeth smiled at her escort as they approached her apartment. Thank you for escorting me to the party tonight, Arch. I had a really good time. You're a great dancer. Thank you, Elizabeth. You too. You made a sensation among your peers tonight. I kept hearing good words about you from everyone. You didn't act like a new girl. Arch smiled. I don't know what it is, but I feel so comfortable here with my staff and the other members of Bill's staff. It feels like we've been working together for years. The husbands and wives of the other officers are also so kind and helpful. It feels like you're one big family. Bill likes to maintain that attitude, and he is very careful to select people to fit that model. I think it makes for a much better work environment. That's not to say that Bill can't resort to harsh measures when he feels the need, but I think he feels that need less often than many CEOs because he selects people carefully. Arch noticed they were approaching her door and stepped back slightly. Well, here we are. Thank you for allowing me to accompany you today, Elizabeth. I'll see you on Monday. Elizabeth put the key in the lock and opened the door slightly. No, Arch, thank you. I have enjoyed myself immensely, and I have enjoyed your company. See you Monday. With those words, she entered her apartment and closed the door. Months passed, and Elizabeth settled into the role of CFO as easily as Joe had predicted. She was able to utilize Joe's base and refine it, making many policy changes that increased the corporation's profits while maintaining the high standards the company was known for. During this time, Elizabeth and Arch became friends through a close working relationship. They ate lunch together a couple times a week and had dinner together after long hours of work. Arch and Elizabeth mostly talked about work topics, but like many people in their situation, personal information gradually crept into their conversations. He learned that she had been divorced for 10 years, and Arch learned that she had been divorced for 3, almost 4 years. Arch was surprised to learn that Elizabeth doesn't have children. Her husband doesn't want to have them, and he, although he mentioned that he doesn't have children, didn't elaborate. As Arch remarked during the interview, they had a lot in common. He felt very comfortable in her presence. He didn't consider himself in love with her, certainly not as much as he was in love with Dee when they first met, but he was very happy to be with her and looked forward to seeing her when they parted ways. Elizabeth, on the other hand, was perplexed as to what was holding Arch back. He seemed to be happy with her and enjoyed her company as much as she enjoyed his, but he never took it to the next level. They didn't have dates, they met as friends. At first, she thought he didn't want to date a coworker for fear that if things didn't work out between them, it might affect their work. She inquired if the company had a rule against spousal relationships. She contacted the HR director, who assured her that there was no such policy. Talking to colleagues, she learned that Dr. Bernie Green was as close to Arch as anyone, and he was the person to go to for clarification about Arch's situation. One day, she saw Bernie in the cafeteria, and noticing he was alone, made her way to his table. "Dr. Green, may I sit down?" Elizabeth said. Bernie Green looked up and saw the tall brunette he had seen with his friend Arch standing at his table. He stood up and pointed to a vacant chair. "Please join me, Miss Can. I don't think I've ever enjoyed myself so much." "I see you know who I am honored." "Miss Can, your reputation precedes you. Everyone is talking about the new CFO and her innovative ideas." Elizabeth smiled shyly. "Please, call me Elizabeth. I didn't realize my fame was so widely known, but I'm very pleased to hear it. I like to be recognized for my efforts. I hope I don't seem too narcissistic." "No, and please, call me Bernie. To paraphrase Walter Brennan from the old TV show, no talk, just the facts." "You have a lot to be proud of, Elizabeth, and you deserve credit if my opinion means anything." "I remember Walter Brennan, but I don't think I ever saw the show." "I appreciate your sentiments, Bernie. Everyone here is so nice and you're upholding tradition." Bernie knew this meeting was more than a mutual admiration society and decided to cut to the chase. "While it was fun to compliment each other, I have a feeling you wanted to talk about something else. Am I right, Elizabeth?" Elizabeth had the grace to make an embarrassed face. "Was I really that obvious, Bernie? I did want to talk to you about something, or rather, someone. Arch Meter. I heard you're his best friend, and I wanted to see if there was anything you could tell me. I'll do what I can, but some things I can't talk about because of doctor-patient confidentiality." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow upon hearing this information. Arch was a patient. "No, his ex-wife, Dee, but I have a feeling that what you want to know might include information that might pertain to Dee, and I can't talk about specifics in that area." "I completely understand, Bernie. Since you know why I'm here and what I'm interested in, I'll just start. I like Arch, but he seems to be holding back. We're good friends, at least I think so, but I'd like to be more than friends, and he doesn't say no, but he doesn't respond to my signals to move forward either. Could you shed some light on that?" Bernie paused to digest Elizabeth's comments. He had to proceed with caution. While he wanted Arch to find someone new, since reconciliation with Dee was out of the question, he didn't want to tell tales from high school life, so to speak. "I'm sorry, Elizabeth, if it seems like I don't want to answer, but this is a very touchy subject. Arch is one of my best friends, but so is his ex-wife. I don't want to offend either of them, and what you want to know could be offensive in the wrong context. Before we go any further, I want you to promise me that nothing we've talked about today will be repeated to anyone, not even Arch." Elizabeth reached out and patted Bernie's shoulder in solidarity. "I understand, Bernie, and I will never divulge anything you tell me in confidence. Of course, I'd appreciate any information you give me, but I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. If you need to keep quiet about something, that's not a problem. Okay, then I think Arch doesn't want to get into a serious relationship with any woman. Not just you, because he still has feelings for his ex-wife that he can't put behind him. He doesn't love her. He told me this in person, but they were married for 20 years and he did love her, and feelings like that take time to get over. There were some problems in the marriage that led to the divorce, but they came so suddenly that Arch didn't have time to get used to the idea that he wasn't married to Dee. For the first 3 years after the divorce, he was a workaholic, shutting himself off from all possible social activities. It wasn't until recently, in the last 6 months or so, shortly before you joined the company, that Arch and Dee began to socialize with each other. They had agreed to remain friends, and for the most part things were going well for them. So, to put it in those terms, Arch has only been divorced for the last 6 months and probably isn't ready or even eager for a new relationship yet. I see. That certainly clears up some things that I was confused about. Arch's actions make a lot more sense now. When he mentioned that he'd been divorced for almost 4 years, I assumed he'd already come to terms with it, or at least almost come to terms with it. He must have really loved his ex, right? Yes, he did. They were one of the happiest couples I've ever known for the first 8 years of their marriage. The problems started gradually, but Arch, who believed in the sanctity of marriage, never gave up. There were ups and downs over the next 12 years, more than in many other marriages, but Arch was steadfast and worked to make the marriage better. I don't want to say it was all Dee's fault. She had and has issues that I can't go into, but Arch loved Dee so much that he put up with a lot to make his marriage survive. Like I said, there came a point when Arch said he couldn't put up with it anymore, and they divorced. At the end of the day, he still loves her, but he's not in love with her. They seem to be good friends now, and given the circumstances, that's a lot of progress for them. Elizabeth reflected on what she had been told. Arch's actions, or rather inactions, made a lot more sense. Bernie had reassured her on a number of issues, chief among them the feeling that Arch was no more interested in her than a friend. She wasn't sure if that was actually the case, but at least now she knew that Arch probably didn't want to start a new romantic relationship while going through a divorce. Since she had been divorced for over a decade and had no interest in any of the guys she had met, she decided to give Arch the time he needed and see how things went. Thank you for the information, Bernie. I really appreciate it. I want you to know that I won't say anything to anyone about our conversation, and I want you to know that you've reassured me about Arch. If you don't mind, I would like to have lunch with you again, but not to hear from you about Arch. But as a thank you for what you did today. My treat. Bernie smiled broadly. You hit the mark, Elizabeth. I may be a married man, but I won't turn down a dinner offered by a beautiful woman. Weeks turned into months, and Arch and Elizabeth grew closer as friends. Arch asked Elizabeth to accompany him to many corporate events, and coworkers decided they were a couple. At one such event, a company picnic, Bill said something that made Arch wonder. Arch, how are you and Elizabeth doing? You have no idea how glad I am that you're interested in someone after all these years. Arch was perplexed as to what Bill was talking about, and his confused look on his face prompted Bill to elaborate. Come on, Arch. It's no secret. We all know you're partial to Elizabeth. I think that's wonderful. You two make a wonderful couple. Bill, I think you've got it all wrong. Elizabeth and I are good friends, nothing more. Arch, you're the one talking to me. I see the way you act around her. Even now you know exactly where she is, and when your gazes meet, your faces light up. I've seen the way she looks at you when you don't notice it. And whether you want to admit it or not, you have that look too, though perhaps to a lesser extent. You're a beautiful couple, and I hope things work out for you. Look, I'll talk to you later. I'm needed in the tank, now it's my turn in the box. Is he really right? Arch thought. Am I really doing this? To test the theory, he looked around the neighborhood for Elizabeth, though he seemed to already know where she might be. Finding her, he watched her until he caught her gaze, and just as Bill had said, Elizabeth's face lit up. The smile on her face was more intense than it had been while talking to her friend. If he was honest with himself, he felt the corners of his mouth lift as well, and his heart raced at her attention. Oh my God, Bill's right. I react to her the way she reacts to me. I must be the biggest fool in the world. If Bill is to be believed, and I have no reason not to, everyone but me thinks we're a couple. I wonder how long Elizabeth was going to let me sarcastic before she said something. Not wanting to put off for tomorrow what needed to be done today, Arch decided to talk to Elizabeth about her feelings and his own. He headed over to where she was talking to one of her coworkers, a pretty young girl whom Elizabeth was mentoring. Hello, girls. Joy. Are you enjoying the picnic? Oh, yes, Arch. Elizabeth and I were just talking about how much fun we're having. We're going to participate in the three-legged race today. Then I'll be sure to come cheer you on to victory. Arch turned to face Elizabeth. Elizabeth, may I speak to you privately? Elizabeth pulled away from Joy, and together they walked to the picnic area and sat at a table away from the crowd. Elizabeth was worried about what Arch might want to talk about. He looked very serious. Is something wrong, Arch? No, nothing's wrong, Elizabeth. Bill and I were talking and he brought something to my attention. I don't know how to put it, but I think I've been somewhat ignorant as far as you and I are concerned. What do you mean, Arch? Well, he congratulated us on being a couple, and I didn't understand what he meant. He kept giving examples that led him to that conclusion. And after we talked, I checked some of the things he said, and by golly, it turns out he was wrong. Elizabeth wondered where this would lead, but she hoped it would lead to what she wanted. What did he say? He said that you and I look into each other's eyes when we see each other, and that we know almost instinctively where the other is when we are not together. I decided to see if he was right, and this is what happened. I didn't know exactly where you were in the parking lot, but I found you pretty quickly because I could almost feel where you were. When our eyes met, your face changed. Your smile grew wider and your eyes sparkled. I smiled too, and felt warmth in my chest from that touch. Arch paused and took her hand before continuing. Elizabeth, am I right? You care for me as much as I care for you, even if I was too stupid to realize it? Elizabeth's heart melted at the love and admiration in Arch's eyes. It looked like it was time for Arch to admit that he had feelings for her. She would have to thank Bill later for the push that made it happen. Yes, Arch, I care for you very much. I've been waiting for you to realize that too, and I'm very glad it finally happened. I didn't feel the need to push you because I wanted to get to know you better as a friend first. As we grew closer, I felt like we were becoming a couple, even if we didn't realize it. It happened gradually, and I waited patiently for you to realize it. The man is always the last to know, isn't he? In this case, I guess that's not such a bad thing. So what's next? I think a real date would be nice. How about dinner tomorrow night and dancing afterward? How about that? Elizabeth smiled happily. That would be wonderful. Would 7:30 be okay with you? I need to get a new dress. That would be fine with me. Now how about we go to the playing field and get you ready to race? Next chapter. Arch sat in his room and contemplated his upcoming date. He was looking forward to this evening. It was amazing how easily he had accepted the situation. For just yesterday, he had only seen Elizabeth as a good friend and nothing more. How could he have missed the feelings that now seemed so obvious? Had he become so numb that he was subconsciously drawn to a woman as beautiful as Elizabeth? According to Bill, he had been acting like part of a couple for a long time, though he hadn't realized it. Perhaps Elizabeth had crept up on him so stealthily that any resistance he might have felt was ignored. If someone had asked him yesterday if he was looking for a relationship, he would have confidently said no, he wasn't. He was content with his situation and had no need for romance. He had great friends at work, male and female, and with his ex-wife he now had a warm relationship and didn't feel a pressing need for anything more. Now that he thought about it, he really did want more. He'd felt there was something special about Elizabeth ever since they'd first met when she was interviewing for a position, though he hadn't admitted it to himself at the time. There wasn't one thing about her that attracted him. What attracted him was that Elizabeth was a complete package. They had become great friends, and now that there was a romantic aspect to their relationship, he realized how that could help him. He didn't have to guess what she liked. He knew because they told each other their likes and dislikes. He didn't have to worry that tonight would be filled with nervousness about safe topics of conversation because they had already discussed those topics, as well as some of the unsafe ones, and enjoyed the discussion even if they didn't always agree with each other. He knew he wanted to be with her when they were apart, and was happier than he had ever been in all the time they had been together. Tonight wouldn't be as awkward as a normal first date, especially for a man his age. He hadn't been on a date in over 20 years, and usually the thought would horrify him, But this wasn't the case as he was going on a date with his girlfriend and he felt fine. However, it was the physical aspects of the relationship that bothered him. He hadn't kissed another woman since he had gotten married. What bothered him was the fear of disappointing her out of inexperience. He sincerely hoped that it would be like with the bicycle and everything would work itself out. Since Elizabeth was waiting for him to come around, he planned to mostly follow her lead and take cues from her about what she wanted from him. One thing he knew for sure was that he wasn't ready for physical intimacy with her yet. It would take small steps to get comfortable. He also didn't think Elizabeth would want to jump into bed on the first date. It wasn't her style, so he dismissed the idea as something to consider in the future. Arch pulled up to Elizabeth's house at 7:25 p.m. Checking his tie in the mirror, he got out of the car and headed for her door. Taking a deep breath, he checked the flowers in his hand once more and rang the bell. A few seconds later, the door opened and the sight he saw took his breath away. Elizabeth's hair was slicked back and tucked behind her ear, a style he hadn't seen on her before but hoped he would see more often. He then turned his attention to her dress, the stereotypical little black dress, but it hugged every curve like a lover and ended a few inches above her knees. She wore a simple pearl necklace, earrings, and bracelet to complete the ensemble, and of course, shiny black high-heeled shoes. In short, she was the epitome of beauty. Realizing he was probably being stared at, he held out a bouquet of flowers to her before he spoke. "Wow, Elizabeth, you look beautiful. Here, these are for you." Elizabeth pondered Arch's words and was glad that she had managed to elicit such a reaction from him. She had put a lot of effort into looking the way she did today, and it seemed she had succeeded. "You look very good, Arch. I like that suit. And those flowers are beautiful. Please come in while I get a vase to put them in." She led him into the living room and motioned for him to sit on the couch. When he was comfortably seated, she quickly took a vase from the kitchen cabinet, filled it with water and placed the flowers in it, then went back and placed the vase on the coffee table in front of Arch. When she returned to the room, Arch stood, figuratively pinching himself. He still couldn't believe that this beautiful creature was the same woman he worked with every day. That's not to say she wasn't attractive at work. She was, but she obviously dressed lower so as not to appear too attractive. Tonight, she didn't feel the need to, and the difference was stark. Glancing at his watch, Arch remarked that it was time to go if they were going to make a reservation. "I don't want to rush things, but we should get going, Elizabeth." "Okay, I'll just grab my backpack and we can go." She grabbed her cloak from the back of the chair where it lay, and Arch helped her slip it over her shoulders. He left the apartment, waited for her to close the door, and held out his hand to walk her to her car. The ride to the restaurant was quick, and soon they were sitting at a table in a secluded corner. "This looks like a nice place, Arch. Do you come here often?" "As a matter of fact, yes. I've been coming here for business meetings and such since they opened, which is about a year now. I really like the food and the privacy that the seating provides. I can have a business conversation without too much trouble, as long as people aren't talking too loud. You can't hear anything at the other tables." "I think the atmosphere here is very romantic," she said with a sly grin. "Well, yes, now that you mention it, it is quite romantic. I hope you approve?" Arch asked hopefully. "Oh yes, Arch, of course I approve." At this point, the waiter came over and after taking the drink order, left them to study the menu. Returning with the drinks, he took their dinner orders and left as quickly as he had come. "You mentioned dancing after dinner, Arch. I haven't danced since Joe's retirement party, and I'm looking forward to it." "You're a very good dancer, if I remember correctly," she said symbolically. "The dancing here in the parlor starts at 9 o'clock. Arch paused to study her other comment. "Had it really been that long? I apologize and promise you won't have to wait another 6 months before I ask you to dance again. You can be sure of that." He grinned. "I'll keep you posted. I just love to dance, yes, so much so that you may regret that promise." Arch smiled warmly at her and continued in a low voice. "I'll take my chances, Elizabeth." His words sent a wave of desire running down her spine. Arch had never spoken to her like this before, and she liked it. She reached out and took his hand. Her eyes darkened as her desire for the man sitting across from her rose to the surface. Arch noticed the change in Elizabeth almost as soon as the words left his mouth. He could almost feel the heat emanating from her, and her eyes spoke of an unprecedented desire for him. Instead of being surprised at the depth of her feelings, he rejoiced, and it fueled his desire for her. He hadn't felt this kind of desire in many, many years and found that he liked the feeling. For the first time since the divorce, he felt alive. Elizabeth was giving vent to feelings he had buried for too long, and he was enjoying giving them a way out again. All those feelings passed between them without words, and just as Arch leaned over to kiss Elizabeth, the food arrived. Snapping out of their cocoon of desire, they leaned back in their chairs and, blushing, began to eat. The conversation naturally died down during the meal, and after dessert they went to the lounge, taking a vacant table near the dance floor. Arch ordered a bottle of wine for them, and they sat down, waiting for the band to finish tuning up. Arch poured them both a glass of wine, raised his own glass, and proposed a toast. "To best friends," he said quietly, looking into her eyes. "To best friends," she replied with feeling, and they sipped their wine. All evening they danced, enjoying embracing each other. When the first song ended, Arch and Elizabeth kissed for the first time. "Wow," she said, feeling stunned and unable to formulate a coherent thought. Arch smiled lovingly. "Yeah, wow. I was worried when I did it. Didn't want to embarrass myself because of my inexperience." "If it's inexperience, Arch, I don't think I can handle it once you get back on your feet. Thank you, Elizabeth." Throughout the evening, they spent more time on the dance floor than off it, but found enough time to finish off a bottle of wine in between band performances. All too soon, the band leader announced that the next set would be the last, and they took advantage of this by dancing every dance. By the end of the evening, it felt like they had known each other forever, and that they knew each other's bodies as well as they had never known each other's clothes. Given the heat they had radiated throughout the evening, Arch was beginning to worry that his resolve not to become intimate tonight might be put to the test. Although he was quickly falling in love, or maybe he already had, with Elizabeth, he still didn't want to rush things. He didn't want her to think he was like all men, and had only one thing on his mind. Oh, he wanted that too. He would be a fool if he didn't. But he wanted her to know that he loved her for herself, not for her physical attributes. Again, trusting what he knew about Elizabeth, he was sure she wouldn't push her own way tonight, and relaxed as he realized that. Elizabeth, too, was pondering what to do next. It seemed to her that they had made tremendous progress tonight. She could feel Arch's desire in everything he did, especially in the way he embraced her during the dance. However, she wondered if he wanted more now that she had unleashed his desire. She was expecting more too, but not tonight. She had never been the type to sleep with a guy on the first date, and she wasn't going to do it now. Knowing Arch, she was sure he would understand her reluctance to take that step tonight, so she relaxed as they walked slowly to her apartment, each immersed in their own thoughts and holding hands the whole way. When they parked in front of her apartment building, Arch walked to the other side of the car and opened the door in front of her. "I hate to leave you, but if I don't, I'll do something we're not ready for right now. I've had such a good time and I don't want to ruin it by going too far for a first date. I hope you don't mind, sweetheart." "Honey?" He hadn't used any affectionate words before, but she liked it. She agreed with him and tried to reassure him. "I agree, darling. I've had such a wonderful evening and it seems right to end it now. Thank you for being everything I imagined you to be." "Darling." Arch was afraid she would object to his caresses, but she not only accepted them but reciprocated. His heart raced as he realized he'd made the right choice today, and he was proud that she realized it too. "I'll call you tomorrow, Elizabeth, if that's okay." "I'd love to, Arch. It's my pleasure." He let go of her hands and turned to head home. Images of that night flashed through his mind until he fell asleep, dreaming of the best date of his life. The next morning, Elizabeth woke up early, remembering last night's date. It had gone better than she could have hoped, considering that on Saturday she and Arch were still only friends, at least officially. When she got home, she was so happy that she remembered dancing with Arch. She headed to the kitchen where she made breakfast while the coffee flowed into the coffee pot. While she ate, she tried to read the newspaper but gave it up as her mind was only filled with memories of the night before. Her musings were interrupted by the ringing of the phone. "Hello?" she asked, hoping it was Arch. "Good morning, Elizabeth," came the smooth voice she was so eager to hear. "How are you doing this morning? Did you sleep well?" "I slept like a baby, Arch. I'm glad you called early. I wanted to hear your voice," she said shyly. "I'm glad you said that because I was worried it might be too early, but I couldn't wait any longer." He paused for a second and before she could say anything, continued. Would you like to go on a picnic in the mountains today? I know a lovely clearing a short walk from the main trail. I'd love to show it to you. Hmm, a picnic in a meadow, alone, oh yes. I'd love to, Arch, but how do you know I like to walk in the mountains? You mentioned it once, and I remembered when I was thinking about what to do tonight. The food is almost ready, I was just waiting for you to say yes before I finished everything. I can be there in about an hour, do you mind? Oh, Arch, I could have made the food myself, but I appreciate your efforts. An hour is fine. I have a bottle of wine I can bring over if that's okay with you. That would be fine. I don't have any wine in the house right now. I'll see you in an hour then. Bye, honey. Bye, Arch. See you soon. After that first day, the relationship between Arch and Elizabeth grew rapidly. They spent most of their free time together, either at his house or hers, doing all the things that a couple in love does in private. During this period of his life, Arch recognized himself and felt that he knew Elizabeth well, so the thought of marriage did not immediately cross his mind. He picked out a ring he was sure she would like, but arranged with a jeweler to exchange it if necessary, and then made a reservation at the restaurant where their first date had taken place. They were seated at the same table and chatted animatedly throughout the meal. After dessert and before they were to move to the ballroom for dancing, Arch reached into his pocket and pulled out a small blue box. Kneeling down in front of her, he opened the box. Looking her straight in the eye, he asked, "Will you marry me, Elizabeth?" Elizabeth saw the beautiful ring sparkling in the box, and her heart jumped in her chest. She had to swallow several times before she could find her voice. "Yes, oh yes, I will marry you, Arch." She threw herself around his neck, clutching his arms with such force he thought she would break his neck. He took the ring out of the box and slipped it on her finger, where it fit perfectly. Their reverie was interrupted by the applause of the restaurant patrons sitting around them, and they applauded, blushing as they did so. They made their way to the lounge where a bucket of champagne, courtesy of the receptionist, stood by their table. The rest of the evening passed quickly, and they left early to continue the celebration at her house. Saturday morning, Arch awoke early, the light from the window filtering through the shade. He replayed the last few months of his life in his head, and still couldn't believe his good fortune. After the last joyless years of marriage and the joyless years after his divorce, he never thought he would be this happy again. He felt truly blessed that love had found him twice in his life. But there was one thing that marred his happiness. He had to tell Dee of his engagement, and he didn't want to do that. He had to tell her in person. He was indebted to her for all they had been through together, and he felt that she was still holding out hope that someday they would be together again. She never said anything like that when they had lunch sometimes or when he saw her at Bernie and Deborah's receptions, but he saw something in her eyes that could be mistaken for hope, especially when she was talking to her sister and he could see them but not hear them. He didn't want to hurt her with this news, but he didn't want her to find out secondhand either. It had to be done, and done as soon as possible. On Monday at work, Elizabeth would be sure to tell her friends something, and then the cat would be out of the bag. He sighed and continued to stare at the ceiling. Elizabeth slowly woke up, looked at her left hand and saw the ring Arch had put on her last night. It still felt like a dream to her and she didn't want to keep tossing and turning. Turning her head, she heard the man next to her sigh and saw that Arch was staring at the ceiling, clearly deep in thought. "Good morning, darling. Is something wrong?" she asked cautiously. Arch turned and saw his fiancée looking at him with concern on her face. He needed to dispel that look quickly. "No, darling, it's all right. I was just thinking about what I need to do, but I can't wait. I have to tell Dee we're getting married," he said softly. "Huh?" she asked with obvious curiosity in her voice. "Yes, I feel obliged to do so. We've been together for years, and she doesn't have to find out about it from the papers. I just don't want her to. How do you tell your ex-wife you're getting remarried?" "Hey Dee, congratulate me. I'm getting married?" "I don't know what to say," he replied simply. "You're a good man, Arch. Most guys don't think about their ex-wife's feelings at all. You'll figure out how to break the news as gently as possible. I know you will. Thanks for the vote of confidence, dear. I'm going to need moral support. I'll call her later today and invite her to lunch tomorrow, if that's okay with you." "Sure, no problem. You'll be with me for the rest of the day and the rest of our lives, so I can make time for you for lunch tomorrow. I think I'll invite Joy to lunch too. I don't think I can wait until Monday to show off." "That's a good idea, Elizabeth. But please ask Joy to keep the noise down until Monday." I want to have a quiet Sunday afternoon with you before all our friends find out. You know we won't have a moment's peace once the rumors start to spread. Speaking of which, do you have any preference as to when you want to have the ceremony? Geez, Arch, I haven't had a chance to think about it. You just proposed yesterday and then we danced and partied all night. My thoughts have been busy. She smiled to soften her tone. I'm sorry, dear. I just thought I'd ask since it's crossed my mind. I think the sooner the better. So, whatever works for you works for me. I'll think about it and let you know, dear. Next chapter. It was 12:55, and Arch was sitting at a table in a trendy outdoor cafe. He looked at his watch for the third time in the last 3 minutes, realizing that time wasn't going fast enough for him. Just as he looked at his watch once again, the maitre d' directed Dee to his table. He stood up and pulled back a chair for her. Seating himself back down, he began, Thank you for coming, Dee. I appreciate you meeting me on such short notice, he said more nervously than he would have liked. Dee saw the tension on his face, heard his voice, and became worried. Despite the separation, Dee still knew him well enough to realize he had something to say, and he was sure she wouldn't like it. Pulling a smile onto her face, she wondered what it could be. No problem, Arch. You know I like it when we have lunch together, she said. She decided that no matter what he said, it wasn't going to be good news, so she decided to get it over with as soon as possible. You seem concerned about something, Arch. Is it something I did? Dee couldn't help but notice how nervous he was, so she decided to get straight to the point. No, Dee. You didn't do anything. There's something I need to tell you. I didn't want you to find out from someone else. I owe you. He paused, looked into her eyes, and took a breath to calm himself before continuing. I'm getting married, Dee. We'll get married. He's getting married, she thought. The last thing she expected to hear today was exactly that. As much as she tried not to admit it, she still had hope that someday Arch would change his mind and come back to her. Deborah had told her that more than once. Arch just needed to get over the pain she had caused him. Once he could get over it, he would start to miss her and realize how much she had changed. How much she had become like the woman he had married instead of the bitch he had divorced. Her hopes had risen a little after they had resumed their friendship, though Arch had been very detailed about the nature of that relationship. Now, however, her hopes were crumbling beneath her feet and she had to force herself not to cry. She had done this to herself. Worse, she had done this to him. She had hurt him so much that his love for her was not enough to overcome the resentment. Realizing that she had been silent for too long, she decided it was best to congratulate him, though doing so was the last thing she wanted to do. Reaching across the table, she placed her hand on his arm. Congratulations, Arch. I'm happy for you. Who's the lucky girl? Arch could see that despite her calmness, Dee was upset, but he hadn't expected otherwise. As he had suspected, she had harbored hope for their reconciliation, and now that hope had been killed. Even though he was pleased with his situation, he still felt sorry for her. Her name is Elizabeth Can. She's the CFO at the medical center. We've been dating for a while now, and I've decided it's time to move on, but not before I tell you. I appreciate your concern for my feelings, Arch. You've always worried about me, even when I didn't deserve it. You're a wonderful man, Arch, and my biggest regret is that I lost you through my own stupidity. She felt tears come to her eyes, but refused to cry. It would only upset Arch, and he didn't deserve that. She lowered her head for a second to calm herself. When is the wedding and will I be invited? She asked with a fake smile. We haven't set a date yet, and yes, you are invited if you want, he replied softly. I want to, Arch, I want to. You've been good to me all these years, and as your friend, I want to share in your happiness, she said sincerely. Arch had been wanting to know one thing for a long time and now seemed like the perfect moment to satisfy that curiosity. Dee, can I ask you a question? Of course, it's a little personal. You can ask, but I might not answer. It all depends on how personal it is. Fair enough. He paused and looked into her eyes, hoping she could see the sincerity in them. Dee, why did you break off your engagement to that British man? I've always wondered about that. Did you look happy in the picture in the paper? Of all the things he could ask, that question was the last one she expected. Should she tell him? Yes, he deserved to know, especially after taking special measures to think about her feelings. It's complicated, Arch. I was stunned at first. Trevor was very charming and unusual. I'd met him a few weeks before at a party Deborah dragged me to. We had been introduced to each other, and he seemed to fall in love with me, and then monopolized my time for the rest of the evening. We saw each other almost every day. He's rich, of course, so we ate at the best places, went to fancy parties, and he bought me very expensive gifts. I was stunned, to say the least. Deborah also thought he was right for me, and let me know I'd be a fool to stop seeing him. She paused to take a sip of water. His proposal at that party was a complete surprise, too. Everyone congratulated me and was so happy for me that I hesitated briefly before saying yes. It was at that time that a photographer took the picture that made it into the newspaper. Reality set in the next day. I didn't know Trevor very well. He was a very nice man, handsome, definitely a good catcher, but I didn't like him. I hope this doesn't sound ridiculous, but I had been in love once before and it wasn't the same. She hung her head and a shiver ran through her body. Gaining her courage, she lifted her head, squared her shoulders, and continued. Once I realized it, the decision came easily to me. I called Trevor that day and told him I was sorry, but I couldn't marry him. He was devastated because he really loved me, fell in love with me at first sight. I told him I didn't have those feelings for him. He asked me if I thought I could love him, and he would wait for me. I was honest with him and told him that, no. I didn't think I could love him, and it wouldn't be fair to deceive him. I made the excuse that I didn't want to move to England with my friends because the subject hadn't come up before I said yes, but Trevor knew the truth. He left for England the following week, and we haven't seen each other again since. I'm sorry to hear that, Dee. You deserve love too. I hope you find someone to love you soon. Arch squeezed the hand she'd placed on his shoulder at the beginning of their conversation, letting her know he felt her pain and was serious about her finding happiness. Eager to lighten the mood, he called for the waiter and they continued their meal in a friendly circle. Arch stood at the entrance to the church with Bernie Green and waited for his fiancée to enter. He looked around at the crowd of friends and family who nodded in greeting as he caught their glances. He was surprised, but at the same time pleased that Dee had apparently brought a date with her. He didn't know how serious it was, nor did it matter. He thought it was a testament to Dee's progress that she was at least going on dates. His attention was drawn to the sounds of a wedding march in the back of the church. There stood his beautiful bride, hand in hand with her father. To the sound of the music, she was marching toward him and their future. The end. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for the next videos.